Love, love, until I feel the breath of the Spirit flowing in me.
Hello, welcome to Spirit of Life. My name is Geraldine Lee, your host, and our guest is Rosemarie Cole. She's an author. Welcome, Rosemarie.
Thanks, Geraldine.
You've written a book, The Carer's View.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Before we go more into your book, I'd like to find out more about your story of faith and how you ended up being a carer.
Well, I didn't volunteer for the job. My husband had been ill for a long time, but his conditions were worsening, and the only thing left for him was to have a transplant of the liver. So all the other conditions were from his immune system. So when that happened, our lives completely changed. And so he had to make a decision of changing his work, and he did. And then we sort of found ourselves out of our depths and into this world of changes, and he ultimately became the patient and I became the carer. So husband and wife titles was one thing, but being patient and carer was totally different. And we both have been people of faith, possibly because we are not just complacent about it. It's been a yo-yo effect. Sometimes it's you wonder where you are, you wonder if you're alone and things like that. So that's how I held on to my faith, and how my husband and I were able to relate through difficult times, and of course love that brings people together. So it's a combination, I think, of so many different things. So yeah.
And what were you doing before you became a carer?
Oh, I have had several positions as in my life, but at the time I was with Home Ec in Upwey High for a year. I was working for the aged and disabilities and looking after people that in our local area. And then I just became a mum for my daughter's last few years of school. Yeah, so, but I then went to a local public school, the Catholic school, and I was an aide.
Oh, very
Loved
good.
that. That was great.
Yeah, so it's quite a change, being active in many different things and then becoming a carer. Yeah. Did you find that your faith helped you through this time of big change?
I'm not quite sure how people can keep positive and focused without having something to believe in. If that's one person's way of saying faith or religion or some form of spirituality, without that, I really don't know how they can cope with the things that happen with illness especially, knocks you off your feet.
Yes, like how many hours would you take in your day caring for your husband?
It's a wonderful expression, 24/7.
Wow. So you never quite switch off?
Do you know, that's quite true, because even when my husband was eventually resting or asleep, I'd be watching him breathing, like when I had children and you'd walk in and think, that's funny, they've been crying and now they've stopped, and that's how it was with me. I was just constant caring, and it's quite draining.
Yes, that's a lot of care and a lot of sacrifice. And what started you on this idea to write a book?
I think I was born with a pencil in my hand. It's always been my way of expressing my feelings. I suppose English has helped me in that way, that I love storytelling and expressing myself in poetry. But writing a journal was actually a very cathartic experience. And so that whatever I was feeling inwardly, I was able to express and not repress. which doesn't always work with a lot of people, but for me it did. And so when things happened that were way out of my control, it was a way of coping.
Yeah,
So
that's fantastic.
If that answers the question,
Yes.
I think, yes, I didn't realise that it would be the product it is today.
Yeah, so yeah, it's definitely a way of coping, isn't it? An expression.
It was a very natural way at first, but then each chapter I ended up writing would have been possibly 7 times I'd have to review it, because I would get that raw emotion out on paper and all my feelings, and then I would sit back and look at that, and then I would have to find a gentler way of coping with it, and then I would have to find how I could make that negative into a positive, so that I would be able to cope with the next thing that was going to come up and hit me between the eyes.
Wow.
Yeah. It was tough enough for Max, my husband, but he was having that support from the doctors and so many other people, but as a carer I felt that there wasn't that help for me.
Yes, and at times carers can seem invisible, isn't it?
It sounds awful, but in the same time, yes, it's quite true, because when I was with Max at the different hospitals, he was in perhaps 6 different hospitals with different conditions each time, I've always noticed the carers with this blank expression. And one day I was looking in the mirror, you know, after crying or some emotion coming through, and I found the same look in my own eyes, and I felt that I had changed, and it wasn't a good change. So I guess like a donkey that's being pushed, they don't want to go someplace, I had to change my thinking too, to enable to cope with the situations that I was ultimately put in.
Yes, it's great that you give a view of what it's like to be a carer, and we're going to hear more of it after the break. You've been watching Spirit of Life. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Spirit of Life. My name is Geraldine Lee, your host, and our guest is Rosemarie Cole. She's written a book on being a carer. Hi.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
You were talking about being invisible. How did you feel about it?
First, I suppose I didn't even realise it at first, because I think I was more angry, because I was frustrated. Things were happening, and it felt like that it was happening when we weren't at the doctor's. It was happening at home. It was happening through the night, daytimes, and things just weren't as planned. And each time, because I'm not a medical person and I don't have the degrees, I couldn't recognise whether it was something that was vital to Max's health and his safety. And
you mean, would you say these are medical treatments? You wouldn't know how important certain medical treatments were, whether you should push it or not push certain medications?
That's correct.
So they didn't always explain every medication. And
I felt, and I do believe, that different medications affect different people in different ways. So in that way, I was feeling as if, well, perhaps that what I was thinking was really not necessary. And it wasn't until I started to go to the doctors with Max, in the rooms with him, and they would sometimes ask me a question, but most times the things that I thought were important weren't really necessarily important to them, but it was happening day in and day out.
yes,
Over that 5-week period before we went back. So I was feeling that that it was just one more thing for Max to be worried about. It was me nagging him. But say, for instance, I had to check if he'd had medications and food, his body, everything was just shutting down. And so, in a way, I was feeling as if I was in the way of the doctors. So even though it was happening at night and there was hot sweats and because of Max's immune system, it was reacting in a different way to it maybe with someone who had cancer, and Max didn't have cancer.
Yes.
So, yes, I felt as a person that my self-worth and whatever my life was going, that almost my life stopped.
Yes, your needs became in the background, and
yes,
and you had to sacrifice your perspective, even of his disease, because of the doctor's perception seemed to be a bit put on a higher, and his perception more than yours, which is hard as a carer, I suppose.
It's very difficult,
yes,
because even so, people would very nicely, but
you felt judged.
Yes, I did. And I didn't know if I was doing too much, because sometimes people can care too much and it's difficult to pull back because it becomes a part of you. But all the things that I used to be and do, it didn't seem to matter anymore to anybody else. And I think that was my cry throughout even writing, that, or I hope it isn't interpreted too badly, but to me, a carer can sometimes be invisible. And I was creating this mantra in my head, which has actually become on through paperwork, that being a carer is what I do. It's not who I am.
That's a good point.
So this feeling of being encased and encompassed by all this heaviness and weight, there had to be something change. Something had to change.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I had to change.
Yeah.
So that in itself was a bit.
That's right. Yeah. Your view was invisible, but you were able to express your view through writing, and that's become a powerful force so that carers have a voice. I
think that carers out there that are homebound, they may be working, they may be having a parent that they need to go to see after, or a child that needs caring. But we sometimes forget that, not just in my particular situation, that there are other members of the family. So I've been rather fortunate, Max and I, because we've had a long time to get used to his conditions, whereas other people don't.
Yes. How many years have you been caring for Max?
Officially 8 years.
Wow, that's massive.
But for Max, he's been ill for probably 26 years of his life. It's deteriorated to that point.
Wow.
So yes, that was a massive burden for him. And of course my heart was bleeding for what he was going through. And many, many times people would, and they still do, bless them, they would ring up and I'd answer the phone and they'd say, "How's Max?"
Yeah, so what about how are you getting on?
It got to me a bit.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds very, very selfish, but I was told recently it isn't.
Yes.
It's more self-care. You know, it's caring about me too.
Yes, and it's so important because if you haven't got your tank filled, how can you give?
I know they wouldn't have meant it. I know they thought possibly I'm more resilient than I even think.
Yes, yeah.
But it's
did
noticeable.
hurt at the time.
Yeah.
And was your writing a dialogue to God, like, to get His support? What was it like?
I read once that somewhere along the line, your prayer changes. Instead of praying and praying and praying, we're not listening for the answers. And so I wanted to pray till I didn't have to pray anymore. And that is exactly what happened, because I knew that I wasn't alone. I knew that none of us are ever alone. But we have to believe it. We have to search for it. We have to accept it. Even accepting help for someone who's a patient is maybe a difficult thing. But as a carer, I found a lot of carers felt guilty because I needed a break. I needed to de-stress and
Yes.
just have that physical, mental, spiritual break.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, talking about breaks, we need to go for a break now.
Oh, there you go.
You are watching Spirit of Life. Stay with us and we'll be back after the break.
Till I hear much breath of the Spirit flowing in me. Love, love, till I hear much breath of the Spirit flowing in me.
Hello, welcome back to Spirit of Life. My name is Geraldine Lee, your host, and our guest is Rosemarie Cole. She's a writer and she has written The Carer's View. Welcome back.
Thanks, Geraldine.
You have shared very personally about being a carer, and I was very interested in what you said about your book and about all the feelings that a carer goes through. And I was looking at your book and I noticed that it has a beautiful sunset in your book.
Right, yes. That's a story in itself, and it gave me the prompting, really, to use this because it seemed appropriate, really. The audiobook came first, and that was many hours with a very patient sound recordist, and also my daughter is a singer-songwriter, so she's on the audio book at the end of each CDs. But this evening I was at Rosebud Beach and I just couldn't believe the sunset scene that was right there in front of me. It was, I called it, it was like a painter's colour palette, It was so beautiful. It drew me towards it, and I wanted to share it with everyone. I just felt this has to be something that's just for everyone. And then when I looked around, strangely enough, there wasn't anyone else there. And so I felt as if the sunset was just for me. No one else could be here at this time. But it became more than that. And so I took many photos, and these ones were my favourite because they aren't colour. They're not coloured. They were exactly what I saw.
Wow.
It was incredible. And one lady who lives close by to Rosebud in Dramana, she said, "Oh, Rosemarie, I know those sunsets. I know that." And she was more drawn to the sunset than what I was actually writing about.
Wow. And when you saw that, was it like a comfort for you as a carer?
I had come through from crossing the Nepean Highway to this absolutely exquisite sunset, but even when I went through the barrier of the trees and the highway, even the wind was denied entrance. I wrote that. I couldn't believe that I was there, and I craved for this, this spiritual peace, this physical peace and emotional peace. And there it was, right in front of me, and I felt as if it was God's message, God's beauty. It was just as if I was looking at the Spirit of God.
Yeah.
I couldn't express it any other way.
So that recharged you so you could get that strength to continue caring for Max?
It was a very strange recharging because I went from being almost neurotic to being just breathing in and out.
Yes. Yeah, I must say that I myself have been a carer, and during the last few weeks of my dad's life, I did see a beautiful sunset, and I found that was very recharging and very comforting for me.
a lot of times when you see the clouds and you see this ray of light in the evening, to me that seems like the blessing of the day that's been, and sleep, relax, and there will be a brand new morning to wake you. And I love clouds. I mean, I can't help it. I love clouds.
And miracles have been a part of your life, especially through this caring period of about 8 years. Can you tell us about one or two miracles?
Wow. I suppose in one way, scientists and even theologians would possibly doubt me, but I don't. That doesn't worry me, because what I experienced, no one else was there, so how could I deny it? But when I was sitting there, I felt as if I was being drawn into this sunset. I had an amazing peace, but when I was just really, it seemed as if the sunset was coming over me. And I know I'm hesitating because it is a very difficult thing to express to someone that I was in a miracle. It was happening. It was an actual... It was something that was physical from an invisible force.
Wow.
If that makes sense.
Yes.
And then the sunset was moving over me, and I felt as if I was enwrapped in this, an embrace. And it was as if I was meant to be there. It was as if it was peace, and it was tranquility, it was healing, it was acceptance, it was just beautiful, refreshing self-worth. It was all those things that were being given to me, unknowns to me how.
You were touched very deeply, and this is written in your book, The Carer's View.
Yes, it is. I couldn't help it, and it was something, part A, and there was a part B of the same evening. But I felt that it was something that had to be given to other people. When you experience, or anyone experiences something that is a miracle, which means it's something that is not explainable, you can't keep it to yourself.
That's right.
You know, it's,
and if people want to know more about your book, how would they? Do you have a website that you have?
It's a rather simple one. It's A Carer's View at gmail.com.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So it's very simple. And there was a message. It was a spoken message. It was so real, and it was surreal, because after a while I noticed that I wasn't quite alone on the beach.
Yes.
So I just took
that's
photos.
fantastic. We'd like you to read something from your book that you were going to read before because we've only got probably a few.
Well, I hide it. I hid it here.
Yep.
All right. Well, shall I?
Yes, and then we'll end.
This is the message, right? That we should be able to be caring for ourselves, because as the tide comes and goes, it has been coming and going for eons of time, but one day the tide will come back for us all. On that day, we will be called to be united with the spirit of the universal deity of the eternal. And we started this journey the day we were born.
Thank you. That was beautiful and a great way to end.
Thank you.
Goodbye, Rosemarie, and God bless you.
Thank you so much
for being
for
on
having
our
me.
show.
Thank you.
You have been watching Spirit of Life. Goodbye, and God bless you.